Often the importance of a battle is only seen later as other events transpire that give the battle more significance. In the history of Scotland, there have been many significant battles, such as Bannockburn, Stirling Bridge, and Culloden. Today I want to talk about another battle, though in truth it was less of a battle than a skirmish, and it can be debated who technically won the battle. Still, the ultimate result would change the shape and the history of Scotland. On the west coast of Scotland, in North Ayrshire, lies the town of Largs, now a very charming place popular with tourists. There you can enjoy a stroll along the waterfront, catch a ferry over to the lovely island of Great Cumbrae, and enjoy such food as the famous ice cream from Nardini's. Just to the south of town is a monument, usually referred to, for obvious reasons, as the Pinsel. The monument was built in 1912 to commemorate the battle that took place in the area in 1263. The battle took place between the forces of King Haakon of Norway and a few Scottish forces serving under King Alexander III. To give a very condensed version of the events that led up to the battle, the rulers of Norway claimed the Hebridean Islands, the islands to the northwest of Scotland, since around 1098. In the 1240s, King Alexander II began to ask King Haakon IV of Norway if Scotland could purchase the islands. Norway refused. In 1262, when King Alexander III came to power, he sent a sterner demand that if the islands could not be purchased, they would be taken by force. King Haakon had no intention of giving up part of his kingdom, and so assembled what the Icelandic annals, written at the time, called the largest army to ever sail from Norway. Somewhere around 140 to 200 ships set sail not only to defend the lands claimed by Norway, but also to raid and pillage other parts of Scotland. These were the fierce warriors often called the Vikings, which still fascinate people today. In fact, in Largs, right across from the ice cream shop, you can take a photo with a large statue of the Viking Magnus. King Alexander realized that it would be difficult to defeat such a mobile force, but that his greatest ally could be the weather. He only had to stall things long enough for winter to approach, as the seas would become too rough for the Vikings to continue their raiding. And so Alexander began negotiations. Representatives from both kings met on the island of Arran, and it always seemed that the Scots were just about to give in to King Haakon's request, but there was always some little point that needed to be negotiated. Finally, the King of Norway had had enough. It was now late September, and the weather was starting to get worse. In order to tempt the Scots to negotiate, he sent some of his ships off on more raids, and then moved the rest of his fleet into the relative shelter between the Cumbrae Islands and the mainland. The area that he chose had steep slopes, which is what gave it its name, Largs, which comes from the Gaelic word for slopes. On the 30th of September, a fierce storm struck, and some of the boats were forced onto the rocks near the slopes. The ships were spotted by some Scottish forces, and they attacked the Norwegian crew with either stones or arrows from a distance. King Haakon sent in reinforcements from some of his other ships, and the small group of Scots fled. King Haakon himself came ashore along with more Norwegians, and they began to salvage what they could from the wrecked ships. On the 2nd of October, while the Norwegians were still camped on the beach, a larger force of Scots arrived, under the command of Alexander of Dundonald, Steward of Scotland. The Norwegian forces were divided into two groups, a small group on a mound more inland, and a larger group which included the king himself near the beach. The small group, fearing that they would be surrounded and cut off from the larger group, decided to move to join the larger one. Many in the larger group, seeing the approaching Scottish army, including many now well-armed knights, thought that their countrymen were fleeing, and what began as an orderly retreat by one group became a panicked rout. King Haakon was taken back to one of his ships, but a number of the other Norwegians were killed as they attempted to flee. Eventually, the Norwegians were able to mount a counterattack and drive the Scots from the beach. And so, in terms of claiming the battlefield, the Norwegians won, but in terms of loss of life and ships, they suffered greatly. On the following day, the 3rd, they buried their dead and burned what remained of the wrecked ships. They then lay offshore for a few days, waiting the return of some of the ships that were sent off on raids. Once what was left of the fleet was gathered, they set sail, visiting a few of the islands before eventually traveling to Orkney. There King Haakon became ill and died at the bishop's palace in Kirkwall. With the death of King Haakon, the driving force for Norway keeping the Western Isles also died. Haakon's son Magnus, the new king, signed the Treaty of Perth in 1266, which leased the Western Isles to Scotland for a payment. which the always frugal Scots soon stopped paying, and simply just claimed the islands and enforced their own rule. I certainly hope you can travel sometime to the charming town of Largs and take in the unusual pencil-shaped monument there. Until next time, goodbye.